my ego wants to say, like, I knew there was a problem and I needed to tackle it. And I want to be that guy.
Right.
But the truth of it is I was scared and clueless.
Welcome back to Recovery APN. My name is Dan, and I'm joined by my co-host, Andy.
Hey, pal. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. Happy to be back.
Absolutely. Great Colorado summer day. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, like 40 degrees in the morning, getting up to like around 75 in the afternoon.
Zero humidity. What a spot up here.
So today we have a special podcast.
Yeah.
Going back to kind of the normal format that we'd like to have moving forward, having a guest come on, an alumni of APN that came into APN, something that we spoke about yesterday, kind of broken, and then left with like tremendous amount of growth and taking on new opportunities and endeavors in his everyday life now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is A, why we're doing this podcast, and B, like why we have an awesome job here, because we get to see people that are broken and then see them, build their life back up and then thrive. And it's just, it's inspiring, it's hopeful, gives me gratitude. So again, this is exactly why we're here, and I'm pumped to hear Kyle's story.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because we kind of talked about in previous episodes, like why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting to the listeners that are especially in the lodge itself to hear like a full story of someone walking into the lodge and being in their current shoes now and the success they're having today after they left. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited is for these listeners that are current clients now to hear this, because right now they're currently talking to or surrounded by their therapists or individuals that are currently in their spot, none that have like progressed and have a successful life now.
And there's like a slogan they say that your recovery is really not for you. And I don't know if I buy that, because I think it's pretty, when I get sober and I get recovery, I think it's for me, but I also think it's for the guy who's still drinking and he's still drugging and he's 3 or 5 years away from even hearing sobriety, and then he'll hear this podcast or he'll hear somebody at a meeting, and then boom. So then that's how that it kind of like it sets it in motion. So Kyle's story, yes, the clients now will be able to hear it, but the clients in a year will be able to hear it as well. And that guy's not even thinking about All Points North Lodge or recovery, and then and how Kyle's been put in a position to be useful for that guy a year away from now.
No, for sure. I agree.
Not to get too beautiful mind on you there.
No, it makes sense. I thought like when I said I disagree, I thought you said about getting sober was you shouldn't be for yourself.
No.
Like this.
No.
So I just want to like make that clear.
Shake it off. Shake it off.
All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, I guess, the first guest of the show.
Get him.
Kyle. Welcome, Kyle.
Hey, Thank you. Appreciate it.
Really appreciate you coming, man. I know it's not like you're from Denver. You flew in from Seattle. So I think on behalf of myself, Andy, and all of APN, like we really appreciate you coming.
Of course. Yeah. Super unique to be back here, and a place that's been foundational in kind of redefining my life. And just be able to walk the halls yesterday and see people. And
what did like that, like when you came up the like over into the gate and you saw the building, was there like nostalgia? Like how did that treat you? How did that feel internally yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I literally have goosebumps as you describe it. So that kind of breaks it down there. I think it's a lot of humility and pride in walking back in. I was joking with people that it kind of felt like I was that high school kid that goes to college and comes back to walk the halls. And so I was trying not to be that guy. But just really good to like be in a physical space that, was the first time that I had explored kind of who I am and what authentic Kyle might look like. Awesome. And to see some people who have been foundational to my recovery is amazing. I mean, Dan and I were clients here together.
That's awesome.
And so to be able to see him and hear his story and see him in sobriety is amazing.
I think one of the first questions I had for you is, prior to coming to the lodge, what was the reason why you came, right? Was there a certain moment? Was there a pedigree of things that continued to happen that were you forced to come? Was it government related? Kind of curious on like what, why did you come in general?
Yeah. So I'd start off, I'm an alcoholic. I had never, before coming to APN, I'd never spoken to a therapist. I was kind of the king of recommending other people to and supporting other people, but I think my own ego got in the way of acknowledging and realizing that I needed it. And I think, alcohol's always played an important role in my life. Interestingly enough, I didn't drink till I was 21, but from age 21 on, and it just got out of control. I mean, it became everything to me. And I'd come to a point in my life where it was more important than my wife and more important than my, at the time, 1.5-year-old daughter. and it was overtaking my life.
Yeah. It's almost like you're in survivor mode at that point. Like, how can I get through the day? You know, like
it was it.
And I think the thing that you might hear a lot is people say, hey, like, hook me up to a lie detector. And it's like, hey, do you love your wife? Do you love your child? More than anything, you do it. But then 6 hours, 8 hours later, when you're in that, oh shit, I'm struggling internally.
Yep.
All that stuff gets like, it's like cloudy. It moves out of the way. And all I think about is a drink or a drug.
Yep. Yeah. So I'd say, personally, just, it's funny when you guys say broken, like my ego pops in. I'm like, hey,
I wasn't broken.
Yeah, come on now.
Yeah. I had my shit together.
I was broken.
Yeah.
Dude, I was going to work.
Yeah. I was changing diapers.
I was supporting my family.
And so I think, honestly, I had become a person I didn't recognize anymore. And the only way at that point in my life that I knew how to deal with that anxiety was alcohol. And it was a vicious cycle, right? Because drinking would then make me anxious that I was drinking. And so it just kept going. So I'd say, personally realizing some amazing support from my family, both my wife and my family, and some really close friends in Seattle, who were very open and honest with me of like, this isn't you, and this isn't your life. And then my drinking had gotten to a point where it was just affecting everything.
Right.
And so, I was holding down a job, but I was not fulfilled and connected.
Yeah. Not present. Like I've talked to a lot of guys where it's like, hey, I'm at the job physically. Like I show up on time, I clock out when I'm supposed to, but mentally I am worrying about my wife, I'm worrying about the drinking, I'm worrying about the mortgage, I'm worrying about everything. Yep. So therefore my job performance obviously suffers.
Yep.
So yeah, no, I definitely relate to that.
And at that point, you mentioned like your friends, family were outspoken.
Yep.
Were there multiple times where they were outspoken and you were in denial and saying like, I don't have a problem, I don't need help, I'm fine? Or was it like right off the bat where you just like admitting defeat?
I mean, I'm still in denial sometimes.
Right.
The ego, I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting you guys were talking at the beginning about like who your recovery's for. Yeah. I'd say the first, when I first came out to APN, I came to APN twice. Mm-hmm. I came out for about 32 days, and I left and thought I was cured.
Right. You were an alcoholic.
And and within, I'm going to say 48 hours, I was proven to the world that I wasn't an alcoholic by drinking.
Right.
And so I came back out 3 weeks later and stayed for about 2 months. And, the first time I came out, it was to appease people. Mm-hmm. Right? It was to show people that I cared, to show people that I was trying to do something to solve this. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ready for it.
Right.
And so my ego wants to say like, I knew there was a problem and I needed to tackle it. And I want to be that guy.
Right.
But the truth of it is I was scared and clueless, and people that I love were very open and honest with me that this wasn't the life that I deserved.
Sure.
Yeah. It just brings back a lot of things that relate to me, but I won't talk about myself in this podcast. But I'm kind of
you can always talk about yourself with me, Dan.
Oh, here we go.
I got drilled by the producer back there, Keith, earlier. So
Dan's very sensitive, Keith.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we're gonna hear nothing about Dan's story.
It's weird, an alcoholic that loves to talk about himself.
Yeah,
it's the first we've ever met.
So right, you get to APN. You mentioned you were here twice.
Yep.
I want to hear about your experience.
Yeah.
Like you walk through the doors, like what was the first experience of the lodge, right? And then like as you progress and you could, go a little fast through your first one, but like the meaningful stay, I want to hear more about it.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about the first time. I just think I was drinking through a fire hose. I mean, I just my therapist here, Dustin, and I talk about like I was the treatment MVP.
Right.
Like I did everything and engrossed myself in it, but for the outward appearance to everybody else that I was taking this seriously. But did I feel it inside yet? I just wasn't there yet. I think in talking about the lodge, like what was so foundational for me is the return. And I remember when I made this decision to return, as you guys know, the amount of shame built up in that. And I thought like, I should probably go somewhere else so I don't have to see people. Which is the all-time irony of being worried about what other addicts are going to think of you getting help.
You're the first one that went back to the
first one ever.
Rehab.
First one ever.
And I think the other point, which we just discussed, is who am I thinking about all day, every day?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about me. Yeah. Dan's thinking about Dan. You know what I mean? Like,
of course.
Whoa.
Of course. But everybody's thinking about me.
Yeah. I love it.
I remember coming back out, and I built really good relationships here. and so much shame and anxiety built up. And I remember pulling up to the lodge, and Tom, who was an RA here, just met my car and gave me the biggest bear hug. And it was just this sense of like, oh, like this was the right choice. Yeah. And I remember being, in the assessment wing, and every staff member stopped by my room and gave me a hug and said, "I'm so glad you're back." Oh. And that concept of like, that's awesome. I'm so glad you're back. At first I was like, wait, you're glad I drank? Yeah. And in the end, it was this message of like, you could have ended up in jail. Yeah. You could have died. Instead, you're here. Yeah. And this sense of like, I'm glad you're back and I'm proud that you're back. And that for me was just this moment that like Tom will always hold this incredibly sacred space in my recovery for many reasons. But like that hug and that presence and humility that he showed there was just
almost allowed you to breathe, like a deep breath. It's awesome.
For sure.
That's great.
No, it's interesting you say that. It gave me goosebumps listening to that because similar to you, I had an experience like that. And I walked out of the car again, like very embarrassed, full of shame and guilt. And, another RA did that to me when I got here. And it kind of removed everything. So it's like it gave me goosebumps just listening to that because like I can like relate firsthand to that.
Yeah.
And I also have like a lot of like experiences with you. And one of the things that like I recall is I wasn't here when you were first here. It was your second time. So I guess like at this point your ego had dropped a little bit in groups. But we were in the same process group and we shared a therapist, and one of the exercises was the therapist would walk in and not say anything. And I didn't know what to expect. Like again, like I never had been through that practice before. And you were always a leader in the group, but I think you had messed up the first time he did that. And so as it got quiet again, no one knew what to do. Yeah. So I think, our therapist was like testing us. And that's so I looked to you, and you were just quiet. So I didn't know what to do. And I remember like, he would go through the exercise and whatnot. And then, our therapist comes in and then he goes to you like, Kyle, like, why didn't you say anything this time? And I think it was just like, I was like you maturing and saying, not making that about you and understanding and being in the moment. Right. And I think the whole idea was to like be okay with doing nothing and be okay with not having to talk.
In the silence.
Be okay, like sit in your own thoughts. Oof. But I just remember like, cause he had talked in that group about like where you were previously, your last day, and where you are today. Right. And I didn't even have to know you to see that growth because I just knew you, like your personality. And so I was a witness to that. Right. And I found that interesting. But going back to your experience at the lodge, were there key individuals here that played a big part in that growth?
Yeah, like other than Tommy that you just mentioned. Like that was my question too. I want to hear what other staff members played a big role in.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it feels like a Grammy acceptance speech, and I'm gonna like leave a name off. What's incredibly humbling for me is the impact that people at the lodge and throughout my sobriety have made. I think at the lodge, Tom has been incredible. My relationship with Dustin is why I returned to the lodge. Yeah. So Dustin was my therapist, and the reason why I, overrode that shame of returning was because I wanted to work with him. There was something of my story that I saw in Dustin. And I loved that he had been working in corporate America. I work in consulting and accounting world. And so I liked that he had that tie. I liked that he was really hard, like really hard. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a one-on-one session with Dustin that I haven't cried. Which I'm a guy that buries my emotions. To all of a sudden be sitting with another.
Can't cry in front of anybody, especially another guy.
Another man my age to sit down and cry about my deep sense of being not enough. Yeah. Kim, who's moved on to another treatment center, who's working in case management, was unbelievable for me. Yeah. Getting some time out in the mountains with her and some other people to hike every morning. The hospitality staff, like Chef Sean, was incredible. Like not a therapist, but somebody to sit down and talk to and feel connected to.
It's awesome.
So like it's all across the board for me. What was unique for me in my second time back, and our buddy Craig used to rip on me and call me like junior staff. But like the ability to be back and feel comfortable and start taking on whatever kind of leadership within APN that I could was also big for me. Because it was more about, like, yeah, sure, some of it's ego, right?
Right, for sure.
But there was also something about, like, starting to put into action, like, some of the things that I was learning, and helping other people along the way. That was huge. And then one of the unique things for me is when I was here the first time, because I came back so quickly,
What was the difference in time?
3 weeks. I came back 3 weeks later. There was still a lot of clients who had been there the first time.
Yeah.
And so that was the other thing. There were two individuals, John and Jamie, who were like amazing men, who I was very close with my first time, and to be able to have that continuity and connection.
Right.
Like I have a trip planned with them to Aspen in the fall, just to see each other and reconnect. And so like having some of that continuity and people that understood my story was super important.
Yeah, it's great. I guess you talked about like the skills, right, that you learned, the experiences that you had, whether it be with peers or APN staff. I'm kind of curious on when you left here, how did those tools help you become more successful?
Yeah. Gosh. I think for me, alcohol is one aspect of what was going on, right?
Symptom.
It was a symptom of a deeper, physical, spiritual, emotional disconnect.
Hole, yeah.
And for me in my recovery, it's been really important. I have a very rational, logical mind. And so like digging into some of the therapeutic approaches that Dustin and I did, like being able to like poke holes in my thoughts is something that for me has been so valuable. And what I always tell people is like deep inside, I'm like a pudgy 9-year-old that doesn't know where to sit in the cafeteria.
That's not good enough.
And I have built up every defense in the world to try to cover that up, right? Like I've built up a presence and sense of confidence, and I've built up an outgoing personality and quick wit and sarcasm, and I've achieved in work or sports.
Family.
And then I found alcohol. Yeah, exactly, right? I got married and bought a house and had a kid. And
doing all the right things.
Yeah, it was everything to show the world that I was enough.
Yeah.
But deep inside, I was just an emotional, hurt kid.
Right.
So getting out, get back to your question, like getting out in this idea of like telling on yourself, which is a phrase we use in AA of like just telling people how you feel.
Honesty.
Was huge, right? Like starting to work with my wife who I've been with for 17 years, and kind of reintroduce her to that insecure 9-year-old.
The 9-year-old, yeah.
Not the guy that has the answer to everything, and is always happy. Like to introduce her to this kind of broken, vulnerable, emotionally
curious.
Curious. Exactly. It's a great word, Andy. Was huge, and like to be able to talk to her about it. There were some people from here that I stayed in touch with and continued to text every day. And then for me, it was leaning into AA.
Sure.
Everybody takes their own path in recovery. I am never going to be one that says there's one solution. AA provided something for me that I didn't have. And that was just a sense of fellowship and people that became part of the purpose of my sobriety.
I love that.
To meet other people that had shared experiences, that could talk my language, and that I wanted to be sober for is huge.
Right.
And it's funny, like if Dustin was here, he'd be giggling, because when I first came here, it was this hardcore, like I have no interest in AA. Never doing that.
I'm not an alcoholic.
I'm
That's
not.
Me. Hocus pocus. We talked about it in the car. A bunch of, mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, it's funny. Dan and I were talking yesterday about a book called "We Are the Luckiest" by an author named Laura McCowan, and she talks about like that one person, like having one person that knows your story, is like a cold glass of water in hell, because all those people that love you and support you don't know what it's like to be an addict.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point. But like my loved ones, I show them what I want to show them. I show them the best of me, right? And every once in a while, I'll fall. But my sponsor and a couple men in my life, they know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that, like you talked about, that power and that vulnerability and being authentic with somebody is, you don't realize what it's doing for you when you do it. But looking back, you're like, oh, that's huge. It's huge for me.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Andy. I'm just about a year and a half into sobriety. I don't know what authentic Kyle is yet, right? Like I would love to know.
Keep learning.
And I find myself as I oscillate between the different phases of my life in kind of an incongruent, siloed approach sometimes of like, which one is this me?
Yeah.
Which one of these is me? And, you know, sometimes I'll share in an AA meeting and I like, you know, I'm like rehearsing it in my head. Like, you know, those shares where you're like,
perfect.
I am going to levitate this room.
Bill Wilson reincarnated.
And I get done. I'm like, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
Like that was the corporate facade, Kyle.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, you know, it's a continued struggle, but yeah, to have people who understand the experience of mental health and addiction in whatever way they talk about that has been incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think in most addicts and alcoholics' brain, their goal is to be calculated, control the situation, be calculated, understand like if I get asked this question, this is how I'm going to respond.
Mm-hmm.
If I get asked this question, this is how I'm going to respond. Like, and I know the outcome, I know the feelings. And I think when you kind of let that go, right, and just that's when the authentic individual comes out, right? It's like, I don't know what he's going to ask, but I'm just going to respond based off of like how I'm feeling. And I think that shows. And one of the things I wanted to ask you was, you talked about being with your wife for 17 years. So it seems like she's been through this journey with you from
Through the ringer.
from the start,
Yeah.
right? I don't.
Yep.
You said your first drink was at 21.
My first drink was at 21. Yeah.
And when did you meet your wife?
At 21.
So she's only she's only really known alcoholic Kyle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So I guess I would be curious to know if she was sitting here. I'd ask her, and I want to get what you think she would answer. But what is the biggest changes she's seen? Right, because she's only known one type of you. And now it's like,
Yeah, she like, who's this guy? Did she ever like when you like clean up the dish or, you know, like something like, hey, I've never seen Kyle do that before. You
Throw
know?
me under the bus for cleaning up dishes, Andy. Come on, man.
I'll take a
Laundry
lap. That's my fault.
Yeah.
No, that's my
Man.
That's on me. Sorry, Mrs. Kyle.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you know, I think my wife has been incredible through this process.
we can give her a quick shout out.
Yeah.
Shout out
Yeah,
Kyle,
exactly.
wife.
Let's make sure
Yeah.
she's beautiful.
Yeah. Lovely.
She's a loving mother.
Yeah.
I think what would come up for her is a sense of presence with our daughter. So we have a 3.5-year-old daughter. And I think the Kyle before was a father who I think was a good father, but was doing it for the wrong reasons. Right? Like I had like a tally in my head of like how many diapers have I changed today?
Right, yeah.
And how many diapers did my friend change today? And like, let's show how much of a father I am. So I think she'd probably talk about the kind of dad I am now. I think she'd talk about kind of this new sense of vulnerability and honesty. I think she would probably use the call out that I say the word I don't know or the phrase I don't know.
So that's huge for you, right?
I haven't said that in the first 37 years of my life, that was never said. I mean, if we were sitting here and you said, yesterday I went to the baseball game.
Yeah.
And their shortstop, they traded. I'd be like, oh yeah, they traded him. He's supposed to be really good.
Yeah.
I don't know who the
No
Rockies
idea.
shortstop is.
That's funny because I was thinking that term when you guys were talking before. The I don't know is a new word for us a lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think she'd probably talk about my dedication to change, to becoming a better person. I think she'd probably talk about that it's been really hard. Like, I think we have this idea that when the alcoholic or somebody in mental health recovery changes, that it fixes everything and it solves everything. And the truth of it is that in a lot of ways, Laura and I are rediscovering how to be in relationship with each other and rediscovering kind of what authentic Kyle and authentic Laura looks like.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of hurt and trauma for her of what I was like in addiction.
100%.
And so I think the combination of those things together, like I don't ever want to sit here and say like, it's like a romantic comedy. Like,
Well, then you just be lying.
our relationship is honest and vulnerable and hard and beautiful and needed.
And moving, right? It's growing, which
Every day.
probably unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting that came up, and is that when a drug addict or alcoholic gets sober, one of the first things that, in my experience, a lot of them work on is being more trustworthy. And I think a piece of that comes with honesty and transparency. And I think what is fortunate about the people that are in our lives is that you're never going to meet someone more trustworthy or honest or transparent after this individual gets sober. It's over going to be too much, right? And then it's like the idea behind like an alcoholic is like, oh, he's a terrible person, that stigma, right? But meanwhile, your wife is now married to probably the most honest person she's ever met, a little too honest now.
Yeah, it's the irony of it, right? We addicts feel comfortable in the black and white. Like I feel comfortable either talking about the Rocky shortstop, or I feel comfortable like telling you that deep inside I feel like a 9-year-old boy who doesn't know where to sit.
Right. It's like crazy.
Extremes.
And so taking these extremes and now trying to find a gray in between it.
With someone that's not an alcoholic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other thing that I would talk about is like, it's not my recovery, it's our recovery. And I don't want that to sound cheesy because that sounds like a freaking buzzword.
Yeah,
It does, but it's beautiful.
Yeah, but for us, it's been like my wife is very active in Al-Anon.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. When I got sober, people told me, keep your wife away from Al-Anon.
Really?
It's just, wives complaining and then they know your secrets. The truth of it, at least in Laura's experience, and I can only talk about her home group, it's been life-giving.
Yeah.
And I remember my wife saying to me, so the Al-Anon program is very similar to AA, right? They work the same 12 steps of AA. And it's just a program about giving up control, controlling what you can, and becoming better people.
Right.
And my wife came home, I don't know, let's say 3 months in, and she said, why doesn't everybody do this?
Yeah. Like in life.
Yeah,
in life.
She's right.
And I said, well, it took me almost dying.
Yeah, right.
to consider doing it. And it took your husband almost dying to consider doing this. And so, it's just... It's the nature of mental health in our country, and I can get on my mental health soapbox, but there's just such a stigma, and there's such a reticence to explore.
Yeah.
And so I think for us, it's just been this new renaissance of for her as well, figuring out what it is in life that, like, what her purpose is and what her sense of connection is. In a similar way that it's been for me.
No, I completely agree. I think, and this is something that I talked about a few times on Andy's podcast, the one we interviewed him. Mine is like this stigma, right? Like people are, in my eyes, people are afraid to admit they're a drug addict or alcoholic because they're afraid how the world's going to view them. And it's probably going to less than almost, right? And yes, like whatever it is, like we've done fucked up shit in our life. So it's like, sure, we made mistakes. But I do think that like the growth in sobriety makes you that big of a person that like you should be like looking down on the other people with that stigma, right? Because all the work you're putting in, like to your point, right? Like why isn't everyone else doing the 12 steps? Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just a normal process that like makes people better individuals.
Yeah. I'll put a little different tint on it. I think I have a meditation. If R.A. Tom is listening, I have to say I do it every day, but I don't.
Shout out, R.A. Tom.
Yeah.
Shout out.
So if Tom asks, I do it every morning in my chair before my
Tom,
coffee.
he does it every morning.
Yes, every morning, Tom. But there's a line in there that everybody in the world today is doing the best they can from their current state of consciousness. And if like you actually think about that, everybody's doing the best they can from their own journeys,
their experience,
from the way their limbic systems react, from the soft spots inside of them about the way they grew up or the way somebody looked at them in a Starbucks,
right,
or whatever it is. And that's been really foundational for me to remind myself, because it's easy, Dan, to start thinking like, well, I'm in recovery. I know this better than you, right? And it's important just to realize, not even to mention, like, I am in a massive place of privilege that I was able to come to EPN. That I have an employer that supported me, that I have a family that supported me, that I have health insurance to pay to see therapists, that I have, within a 15-minute walk of my house, 500 AA meetings, that's a place of privilege.
Absolutely.
In 2022, 7.5% of active alcoholics, are going to get treatment of any type. That includes attending an AA meeting. So that means 87.5% of alcoholics are not even going to have this conversation.
Crazy.
And not to mention, like, being in a position of power as a white cisgender heterosexual male and all the opportunities that I've had from that. Sure. And so, like, keeping my ego in check a little bit of like, I've had everything in the deck stacked in my favor, and so like, at the beginning of AA meetings, there's oftentimes a moment of silence. And that moment of silence for me is always thinking about that 87.5% of the world, 87.5% of active alcoholics, who aren't going to be able to have these conversations.
I agree. That's powerful. Yeah. It's powerful.
No, I like it.
I'm freaking Dan. As soon as I start referencing, numbers or authors, it gets Dan nervous.
So the one thing, hold on. The one thing that the theme that I've been hearing the last 15 minutes while we're talking, there's a book called by a guy named Chuck C. It's called A New Pair of Glasses. And when we get sober, it's like we see, it's like everything's new. Like, hey, oh, that's green. Oh, that's blue. Like I see the world in a different way than I would, if you get sober at 50, it's like, well, what have I been doing for 50 years? Like everything's different, everything's brighter, everything. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. And it's awesome. And the fact that your wife's on the same journey and she's seeing it from a different view is again, it's why we're in this profession. It's why recovery is so, I just think powerful, and it's awesome. What were you gonna say, Dan? My bad. I stepped all over you.
No. Listen, it kind of calmed me down a little bit. I had wheels turning a little bit. Yes. No, it's interesting, right? I think that I think what you said was very powerful. I do, and I would agree with you. I think if you look back on probably all of our journeys, right? I never thought about it, right? I always thought the deck was stacked against me, right? I never looked at it from the lens you just described. And I think that it changes my perception a little bit of it, because I always thought about the negatives side of it. Not yes, I was always grateful for all the help, but I never thought of it I was the deck was stacked for me.
Yeah, to be clear, day one when I showed up at APN,
you didn't feel that way.
That's not what I was saying to people as I walked the halls.
Listen, but I wasn't even thinking that today, right? So, but it is interesting, and I think and we talked about it on an earlier podcast. Is yes, you could have the deck stacked in your favor, but you have to be willing, right? And you have to go through that struggle to get there.
For sure.
Right? It's not like it's rainbows and butterflies. You walk in, you walk out, you're all good, right? There was hard work, there was willingness, there was bad times for you to get to this point.
Yeah.
So let's call a spade here.
Yeah, I think the root of what you're saying is be proud of the work you've done.
You worked your butt off.
And I agree.
Yeah.
With my ego, it's also good to continue to remind myself of all the other things. And it's interesting. Brene Brown talks about her sobriety as her superpower. And you'll hear, Dustin say that it's alcoholism is the greatest disease in the world to have because of what it allows us to then go learn.
Absolutely.
Those are concepts that used to really make me angry, because I was in early sobriety, it was more the why do I have to deal with this?
Yeah.
And I don't want any of this to come across sobriety's tough. It's not all easy.
Yeah.
But I now identify with that. Had my drinking not forced me to make a change in my life, I would have lived my life as, in the words of AA, restless, irritable, and discontent. And I would not have found connection and fulfillment in my life.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important to remember. Because yes, this is tough. It's really tough, but it's teaching me what nothing else in my life could teach me.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to touch upon, sobriety brings the exciting things.
Yeah.
Right. New relationships, transparency, but also, visible intangibles, or things that you're furthering, in your career. And something that, we spoke about, was this, I want to hear about kind of what you have going on. I know you have an exciting venture coming up.
Yeah.
Kind of discuss that. What made you kind of go down that road? I'd rather you say it
than
me say it.
Yeah, for sure. So, as I mentioned, I was super lucky to have an employer that supported me taking time off to get sober, and supported me coming out here. So I still work in that space. I work for a large consulting firm in cybersecurity consulting. But in parallel, along with that, I've actually started a degree in clinical mental health counseling. So again, position of privilege that my employer is actually supporting me going, helping pay for tuition. But, for me, I've always felt a sense of connection in the times when I'm helping others. And I always like to qualify, I want to help others, but I also want to help others for selfish reasons, because that's how I feel the most connected and that's how I grow the most.
Yeah.
So I've started a 3-year program that I'm doing remotely to get my degree in mental health counseling. Similar as Andy, as we talked about with I don't know, where that's going to lead me, I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I've found right now is that it gives me a whole new sense of connection and fulfillment of purpose, and also how I'm able to take what I'm learning about becoming a counselor and use it in my corporate world
family.
To use it in my recovery world, to use it with my family, to use it to rethink what it means to talk about emotions with my 3.5-year-old. Like, it's all these things that come together.
Yeah.
And it was interesting when we were talking about, recovery and addiction. Like, what's been so cool is also creating these unique relationships with, my colleagues in my cohort in grad school who are not in recovery.
Yeah.
But have, similar journeys in kind of rediscovering and having this life renaissance.
Yeah.
No, it's very exciting, right? And I think to be able to do that, right, and kind of live that experience and now be able to help others, like,
I would also
mind blowing.
I would also say, because AA, the term is, hey, this is doing more for me than it is for you. But I would challenge it. I think when you're helping people, you win, and guess who else wins?
Exactly.
The guy you're helping, right? There's no loser. We're
No.
both winning, right? And I think that's the cool part. When you get down and you're helping somebody face to face, like in a real way, like, oh shit, like what that feeling after you get that, you're driving home or you're walking, like it's something special. And the guy that's getting helped, when he leaves, shit, he has that was something special, so I can definitely relate to that. And I love it, what you said.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's not lost on me that I went from, an alcoholic who had never seen a therapist to 2 years later getting my degree in counseling. Right? Like we are addicts and we work in the extremes, and I see that, but it's honestly, it's been something that I've done with great discernment and intentionality.
Love it.
And I don't use those words as like hot button words. Like there's something that's meant a lot to me. And so it's been great.
No, listen, number one, it's like, it's inspiring to hear, right? I knew the story before, and I'm listening to it again. I'm like, for more inspired, right? But I think, like, right, it's great for the listeners. And like, again, the reason why I'm excited about this platform, right, is for the clients sitting in the lodge now, knowing and giving them inspiration about, you walked in here, had to walk in here twice.
Not too broken, just a little broken.
Yeah.
Very broken.
To get your life back in order, right? And now you have an amazing family with amazing support. You're have this new exciting journey, right? Where you don't know where it's going to lead you, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? And you have and you were a normal dude that just had this disease, right? And it's like there's so many people like that in the lodge today that are going through that struggle, right? Is it okay that I have this disease? Do I have to continue to hide it from people, right? Do I need to make sure I come and have my phone there so they don't know I'm at the lodge, right? And I'm covering that up, right? So it's interesting to hear it. I think it's inspiring, right? So, on behalf of us, like I'm very excited that you're here. I'm very excited that our clients and listeners get to hear your story.
Yep.
Thankful for him coming out. Absolutely.
Yeah, and your travel, and thank you to his family for allowing it.
Yeah. I'll end it with this, Dan. There's a professor of mine in school who wrote his dissertation about the healing process of opiate addicts.
Right.
And he talks about something.
I love how he pointed his finger at me, like opiate addicts.
Right. I think it was at the couch.
To be clear.
It was both of us.
And one of the things that stuck with me is an interview he did with somebody who talked about his addiction like a forest fire. Like his addiction was the fuel that he needed to burn his life down, to allow for new growth,
to build. Yeah.
And that's like, I get chills talking about it,
I
because
like that.
there's something about that image of like the new growth that comes from a forest fire and how needed that is. And so that's kind of the message that I think I want to leave to stick with people.
Run.
No, that's great.
Yeah, killed it.
So as we wrap up here.
Oh, I love it. Again, Kyle, that was awesome. And again, shout out Mrs. Kyle again.
Yeah, Mrs. Kyle.
Again, Laura,
Laura,
you're fantastic.
Yeah. So if you want to hear more information on us or see other episodes that we have produced, please visit us at apn.com/podcast. That is apn.com/podcast. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at pod@apnlodge.com. That is pod@apnlodge.com. Kyle, thank you again.
Silky smooth. That's good exit,
That was
pal.
great
You
exit.
killed it. Yeah.
Smashing like.
Kyle, you're the man. Thanks, pal.
Of course.